Good evening, I'm Farhana Sheikh and you're watching AWANI International. Here are our top stories tonight. Russia's Vladimir Putin and China's Xi Jinping hold talks at Kremlin, and Beijing renews call for US to remove tariffs. More on this coming up. These are top stories for tonight. Firstly, Russian President Vladimir Putin has welcomed Chinese President Xi Jinping on Thursday for talks in the Kremlin, a visit that would hopefully provide much diplomatic boost for Moscow at a key juncture in the war with Ukraine. Xi arrived on Wednesday and attended the celebrations marking the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Soviet Union's Great Patriotic War. He said the two countries, as world powers and permanent members of the UN Security Council, would work together to counter unilateralism and bullying, a veiled reference to the United States. The Chinese leader also vowed to defend the historical narrative of World War II, uphold UN authority, and protect the interests of China, Russia, and developing nations. Xi, whose country is locked in a tariff war with the US, is expected to sign multiple agreements, with Russia strengthening their no-limits partnership established in 2022. This high-stakes meeting also comes amid the ongoing Ukraine conflict, where the US is pressing Moscow and Kiev towards a peace deal. Meanwhile, Beijing has reiterated its call for the US to cancel unilateral tariffs on China, underscoring ongoing tensions between the world's two largest economies as they gear up for their first trade talk. China's Ministry of Commerce spokesperson He Yadong stressed that while Beijing remains open to dialogue, any discussions must be based on mutual respect, equal consultation, and reciprocity. His remarks came shortly after US President Donald Trump dismissed the idea of lowering tariffs on China, currently at 145% for most goods, to unlock more substantive negotiations with Beijing. Despite this hardline stance, Trump had previously suggested he might consider reducing tariffs on China at some point. Both sides are staking out firm positions to strengthen their leverage ahead of their first trade talks this weekend in Switzerland. Meanwhile, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent indicated that trade deals with several major U.S. trading partners could be announced as early as this week, though he clarified that China is not yet among them. Drawing on that, the US and Britain are set to announce a deal today to lower tariffs. Trump posted on Truth Social that he will hold a news conference in the Oval Office just minutes from now on a major trade deal, Americans' first since announcing sweeping global tariffs. He says the agreement will be full and comprehensive, one that will cement the UK-US relations for many years to come.
A British official said both sides are working on lower tariff quotas for steel and autos, two sectors hit by 25% US levies. In return, the UK will consider reducing its tariffs on US cars and cutting a digital sales tax that affects US tech groups. However, the UK government will not lower food standards in order to give US producers greater market access. Investors are watching for signs that Trump can de-escalate the trade war, as global tariffs threaten inflation and economic growth. As for Britain, they are trying to reduce the impact of Trump's tariffs while rebuilding trade ties with the EU and finalizing a new trade deal with India.
We will go for a quick break. More on the trade war coming up.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda, tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada.
Welcome back. Continuing our coverage on the trade war, shares in Asia firmed up as investors await potential near-term rate cuts by the Federal Reserve, as well as planned trade talks between Washington and Beijing. The talks later this week could mark the first step in resolving a potentially damaging trade war between the world's top two economies.
In Japan, the benchmark Nikkei 225 climbed 0.23% after the stock market opened in the morning. Meanwhile, in South Korea, the benchmark Korea Composite Stock Price Index, KOSPI, opened up 0.29% to 2,581.27 points. However, China's Shanghai Composite SSE Index opened down 11.46 points or 0.34%. Senior economics lecturer at Monash University, Dr. Isaac Gross, shares his insight on the issues plaguing the current state of economy.
I think the biggest issue facing the economy is not the decision of any firm or business or even a central bank. It's ultimately about forecasting what Donald Trump's going to do. So you almost need a degree in psychology more than a degree in economics to forecast what's going to happen with the economy. And I think that's probably close to what the Federal Reserve is thinking as well.
Chinese Premier Li Qiang will visit Malaysia in late May for the ASEAN GCC China Summit on May 27th, held shortly after the ASEAN Summit on May 26th. Beijing, with this visit, hopes to rally the group against Washington's tariffs.
The visit of China's second-ranked official comes shortly after President Xi Jinping visited Malaysia in April, where he urged ASEAN to unite against US tariffs and advance the ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement. China and the US are set for initial trade talks in Switzerland this weekend, potentially laying the groundwork for deeper negotiations. ASEAN is China's largest trading partner, with total trade value reaching $234 billion in the first quarter of 2025, according to Chinese custom data. China is also the top trading partner for the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, which includes major oil producers like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Qatar.
The Trump administration plans to rescind and revise a Biden-era rule that restricted AI chip exports. According to the Department of Commerce, the overly complex AI rule under Joe Biden's administration will be replaced with a much simpler rule aimed at ensuring American AI dominance.
Thank you very much.
According to Reuters, the Trump administration is considering replacing the tiered system for AI chip access with a global licensing model based on government-to-government agreements. Although the Biden rule was set to take effect on May 15, there's no timeline yet for the new rule as discussions are still ongoing. The framework for artificial intelligence diffusion was issued in January, just a week before Biden left office. It was aimed at keeping advanced computing power within the US and its allies while blocking China's access. Meanwhile, ahead of President Donald Trump's major diplomatic trip next week to the Middle East, he said he will soon announce whether the US will ease microchip export restrictions to some Gulf countries.
Throughout his election campaign, US President Donald Trump pledged to end the war in Gaza and restore peace in the Middle East, a promise that garnered widespread support. While a ceasefire took place in January, truce talks have dragged on, and the Israeli Security Cabinet has now reportedly approved a renewed military offensive in Gaza. Associate Professor Said Han from Wayne State University shares how the Arab American community is reacting to these developments.
I wouldn't even say that there's been little progress on Gaza. I think that there is a full-out regression of the conditions there. Right now, the kill rate in Gaza, in the casualty rate, is far higher than it was under the Biden administration. The severance of all humanitarian aid and the misery on the people of Gaza is far greater than it was under Biden. Now, the community is in many ways experiencing a form of paralysis. They are in shock because of how dire the situation is. There is also perhaps among some a case of buyer's remorse or voter's remorse, maybe even a bit of guilt that they have in their minds or estimation, or at least as the accusations are then leveled against them, contributed to the further misery of Gaza and having made it worse in many ways. They do try to provide some kind of buffeting of this. For example, evidence that recently came to light that the Biden administration, in fact, lied. They did nothing to try to facilitate a ceasefire. In fact, they did quite the opposite. So those kinds of snippets that are now coming to the fore provide some kind of rationalization or some kind of way to dampen the way that the community is essentially feeling completely horrified by what is not only going on, but what members of the community may have, in an inadvertent way, contributed to Trump coming to power. The other problem is, in many cases, they're afraid to speak out because they see that any kind of criticism about Israel, any kind of support for the Palestinians may then place them under greater scrutiny. Anything that they may have posted on social media is being vetted by the State Department. It could impact travel. And now we find that the line of between being a citizen and the protections that it is supposed to afford and those who are non-citizens of the United States is a line that is really being blurred day by day. So the idea then that detentions or even deportations are possible simply based on opinion and simply based on speech or social media posting have had an absolutely chilling effect on the community, the likes of which arguably weren't even seen in the days after 9/11.
As Southeast Asia navigates its diversity, power sharing between central and local governments remains a crucial component in governance. That is the topic explored in a new book by Professor Andrew Harding, who looked at how 5 Southeast Asian countries manage power sharing through their constitutions. Our correspondent, Lauren Tan, speaks to him about this.
Tonight, we're at KLSCAH with Professor Andrew Harding for his book launch titled Territorial Governance in Southeast Asia. Professor Harding is an expert in Asian legal studies and comparative constitutional law. Professor Harding, so we would like to understand, how do you define territorial governance in the context of this book?
Okay. Territorial governance is every form of governance below the level of the nation state itself. In other words, in Malaysia, for example, state government, local government, federalism, those are the issues that it deals with. So everything below the national government is territorial governance.
Great. And then the next one is, what are the similarities or differences of the observations you made, either on common historical events or political patterns across these 5 countries?
Right. There are some important differences between the countries, especially between Malaysia and the other countries. The most obvious one is that Malaysia doesn't have any local elections, whereas all the other countries do have local government elections. Also, Malaysia is a federal state, whereas all the other 4 countries are all unitary states. But as we explained in the session, this doesn't have the effect that you would think, because Malaysia is nonetheless the most centralized of these 5 countries, even though it's a federal state.
Thank you so much, Professor Harding, for your time, and congratulations on your book launch. That's all the time that we have for tonight. Back to you at the studios.
That report wraps up AWANI International. Stay tuned for our reports on the rivalries, strategies, and the shifts behind the power affairs driving the new global order. Visit international.astrawani.com for more, and be sure to follow our social media accounts, Power Affairs. That is all for now. I'm Farhana Sheikh. Thank you and good night.